Hello and welcome to my channel. Imagine a world where no one dies. That would be so cool. I mean, you could... surely that would be cool, wouldn't it? My name's Alexander and today I'm going to review Death With Interruptions by Nobel Prize winner Jose Saramago. It was published in 2008 in Portuguese and is about 200 pages long. And is about death. Plot summary. One day, in some unnamed country, people stopped dying. Just like that. Death, it turns out, is running a little experiment. As an unintended consequence, society slowly starts to collapse. The plot takes an even more interesting turn towards the end of the book, but I don't want to reveal that here. What you can already guess about the book, though, is that it's a kind of thought experiment. Let's imagine that people suddenly stop dying, and then instead of romanticising this scenario, let's try and figure out what would realistically happen. Realistic is a key word here. A completely unlikely, in fact, an impossible event has happened, but it's being tackled by people like ourselves in a world that looks exactly like our own. This also makes Death With Interruptions a very difficult book to classify into a specific genre, but my dear and glorious leader Google tells me that it falls under magical realism. Who knew? Being a thought experiment, the book is of course meant to explore certain themes, and yes, you're right, the most obvious one is death. Usually this is quite a gloomy thing to discuss in a book, but because it's being presented not through the presence but through the absence of death, the whole thing becomes a lot more light-hearted and easier to read. In other words, it maintains a serious aspect while still being fun to read about. There are other themes in the book though, and the less obvious one is that of society. Several times the author, Saramago, pokes fun at big institutions like the government, the media, the church or insurance companies by looking at how ridiculously they react to this crisis that's going on in society. So death is the main theme, but there are other themes as well, and especially towards the end the book starts getting more and more philosophical in its aspect. And that is all I really want to say about the contents of the book. However, what I would also like to spend some time on is the language itself. Admittedly, this has been translated to English from Portuguese, but nevertheless, this is one of the most beautiful things I've ever read. If I gave out awards on this channel, this would win the one for the most poetic style of writing. The sentences are long and flowery, and yet, still, somehow it manages to remain easy to read and follow. And it made me smile from the very first page. So in fact, let me read to you just the first 2 sentences of this book. The following day, no one died. This fact, being absolutely contrary to life's rules, provoked enormous and, in the circumstances, perfectly justifiable anxiety in people's minds. For we have only to consider that in the entire 40 volumes of universal history there is no mention, not even one exemplary case, of such a phenomenon ever having occurred, for a whole day to go by, with its generous allowance of 24 hours, diurnal and nocturnal, matutinal and vespertine, without one death from an illness, a fatal fall, or a successful suicide, not one, not a single one. So, I don't know if it's apparent already from these 2 sentences, but what the book really is a story. And what I mean by that is that it really sounds like there is a storyteller telling you everything that's in here. And in fact, sometimes he'll be talking directly to the reader, and even in rare cases he'll be talking about himself in the first person. You never really figure out who this narrator is, but it really sounds like he's there. So around page 50 I gave up on reading this book normally, and instead began reading it out loud to myself. So, final thoughts on the book. It's not an action-packed one, so as always you don't really think of getting it if you were taken by the plot. But if you feel like you were, I would definitely recommend it. Great story, great style. Saramago deserves his Nobel Prize. That concludes my review of Death With Interruptions. Now, since we're on the topic of death anyway, just a quick question to you before I go. In this book, Saramago is trying to point out the necessity of death in our society. Do you agree with him? Do you think death is necessary, not only from a philosophical, but also from a practical point of view? Or do you think that if science found a way of completely eliminating death, then we, as a society, would find a way of coping with immortality? Leave your comments down below, hope you enjoyed the review, and see you soon.